If you were born before 1955, I want you to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you because there is a good chance your Social Security benefit is not as accurate as you think it is. And I'm not talking about a few dollars here and there. I'm talking about the possibility of losing hundreds of dollars every month and potentially thousands of dollars every year because of information inside a government record that may never have been reviewed properly. Here's the part that surprises most people. Nobody from the Social Security Administration is going to call you one day and say, "We found a mistake and you're owed more money." That's not how the system works. A number is calculated. A payment gets deposited. Most people assume the calculation is correct, and if it isn't, the difference can go unnoticed for years. Today, I'm going to walk you through why this happens, who is most likely to be affected, and the exact steps you can take to determine whether money is being left out of your monthly benefit. Make sure you stay with me until the end because the final step is the one that actually triggers a review of your record. Without it, nothing changes. And before we begin, if you enjoy straightforward explanations about Social Security, retirement benefits, Medicare updates, and financial changes that affect older Americans, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. These programs change constantly, and understanding those changes can make a significant difference in your retirement income. Now let me tell you a story. A retired truck mechanic from Arizona named Robert had been collecting Social Security for nearly a decade. Every month his payment arrived like clockwork. The amount never changed except for annual cost of living adjustments. Like most people, Robert assumed the number was correct. After all, why wouldn't it be? One afternoon, his son helped him create an online Social Security account. Neither of them expected to find anything unusual. But within minutes, they noticed something strange. Several years from the early 1980s showed either very low earnings or no earnings at all. That didn't make sense. Robert had worked full-time throughout those years. In fact, he remembered the jobs clearly, the long shifts, the overtime, the weekends spent repairing engines. The income had been real, but the record wasn't showing it. Fortunately, Robert had kept copies of old tax documents and wage records. After gathering the paperwork, he submitted a request for review. Months later, the Social Security Administration verified that portions of his earnings history were incomplete. The correction increased his monthly benefit and resulted in additional money being paid for benefits that should have been higher in the first place. Stories like Robert's sound unusual. They're not. In reality, situations like this happen far more often than most retirees realize, and the reason is surprisingly simple. Most people never think to check. That's why understanding how Social Security calculates benefits is so important. Because once you understand the process, you'll immediately see where mistakes can happen, and that's exactly where we're going next. To understand why these errors matter so much, you first need to understand how your monthly Social Security benefit is calculated. Most people know the government looks at their work history. What many people don't realize is how heavily that calculation depends on records that may be decades old. The Social Security Administration generally bases retirement benefits on your highest 35 years of earnings throughout your working life. Those earnings are adjusted for inflation, averaged according to a specific formula, and then converted into what is known as your primary insurance amount. That figure becomes the foundation of your monthly retirement benefit. Sounds straightforward, but here's where things begin to get complicated. Every number used in that calculation comes from earnings records that employers reported over the course of your entire career. For some retirees, those records stretch back 40, 50, or even 60 years. Think about that for a moment. The benefit you're receiving today may depend on information that was originally reported decades ago, long before online databases became common, long before digital record keeping was standard, and anytime information moves through a large system over many decades, mistakes can happen. Sometimes an employer submits incorrect information. Sometimes records don't match properly. Sometimes earnings are reported under the wrong identifier. And sometimes income that should have been credited never appears correctly in the system at all. The unfortunate reality is that most retirees never discover these problems because they never look at the records behind the calculation. They simply trust the final number. But trusting the number and verifying the number are two very different things. And that distinction can be worth thousands of dollars. What makes this especially important is that even a single missing year can have an impact. 1 year might not sound significant. But remember, Social Security uses your highest earning years to determine benefits. If a year that should show substantial income instead shows $0, the formula treats that year as though it never happened. The result is a lower average. A lower average can mean a lower benefit. And a lower benefit doesn't just affect 1 month, it affects every month, year after year, sometimes for decades. Financial analysts who study retirement benefits often point out that relatively small errors can produce surprisingly large losses over time. A difference of only a few dollars per day can become thousands of dollars over the course of retirement. That's why missing earnings records deserve attention, not because every record contains an error, but because the cost of ignoring an error can be substantial. Now, let me add another layer to this story, because for Americans born during a very specific period, there is another issue that has caused confusion for years. And it revolves around a date that many retirees either misunderstood or were never fully informed about. If you were born between 1943 and 1954, your full retirement age is 66. Not 65, not 67, exactly 66. That age matters because it determines when you become eligible for your full earned benefit amount. However, Social Security has always allowed people to begin claiming earlier than that. Many retirees chose to file at age 62, and in many situations they had good reasons: health concerns, job loss, family obligations, financial pressure. Life doesn't always allow people to wait. The problem is that many people focused on the fact that they could claim early without fully understanding what claiming early would mean over the long term. A lot of retirees believed their benefits would eventually catch up. They assumed the reduction was temporary. For many people, that wasn't the case. Claiming before full retirement age generally results in a permanent reduction in monthly benefits. And that's a detail that has surprised countless retirees after the fact. Imagine someone entitled to a full benefit amount of $2,000 per month. If they claim early, the reduction can be significant. Not for 1 year, not for 5 years, but potentially for the remainder of their retirement. That's why understanding the rules before filing is so important. Unfortunately, many people only learn the details after the decision has already been made, and that's where another story becomes relevant. Because what happened to one retiree in Ohio reflects a situation that thousands of Americans have experienced. And her experience reveals an important lesson that almost every future retiree should hear before filing for benefits. A few months ago, a retiree from Ohio named Margaret shared a story on a retirement discussion forum that caught a lot of attention. She had been receiving Social Security benefits for several years and assumed everything about her claim had been handled correctly. Why wouldn't she? The payments arrived every month. There were no warning letters, no notices about missing benefits, nothing that suggested a problem. Then, during a conversation with a friend, the topic of retirement age came up. What started as a casual discussion turned into something much bigger. Margaret realized she had never fully understood how filing early affected the amount she received each month. When she originally applied, she focused on the monthly payment being offered. Like many retirees, she was dealing with immediate financial concerns. The future felt distant. The monthly check felt urgent. Looking back, she said she wished someone had clearly explained the long-term impact in plain English. Not through technical language, not through complicated government documents, just a simple explanation showing how one decision could affect every future payment. Her story resonated with thousands of retirees because it reflected something many people experience. Not confusion, not carelessness, just a lack of clear information. And that's why I want to be careful here. If you claimed benefits early, this isn't about regret. It's not about looking backward. What's done is done. What matters is understanding whether there are still opportunities available today. Because here's the important part most people never hear. Even if your claiming decision reduced your benefit, that doesn't automatically mean the amount you're currently receiving is accurate. Those are two completely different issues. One relates to when you filed, the other relates to whether the underlying calculations were performed correctly. And that's where things get interesting because an earnings record error can affect someone who claimed early, it can affect someone who claimed at full retirement age, and it can even affect someone who delayed benefits until age 70. In other words, nobody is automatically protected from record mistakes simply because they chose the right claiming strategy. That's why reviewing your earnings history matters so much. The decision you made years ago may be permanent, but an incorrect record can sometimes be corrected. And that's the difference between something you cannot change and something you potentially can. Now I want you to think about this. Imagine two retirees. Both worked for roughly the same number of years. Both earned similar incomes. Both claimed benefits at the same age, yet one receives noticeably larger monthly payments. Most people would assume there must be some obvious explanation. Maybe one person earned more. Maybe one delayed benefits longer. Maybe one worked additional years. Sometimes that's true, but not always. Sometimes the difference comes down to information inside the earnings record itself. A missing year, an incorrect wage report, an administrative error that was never questioned. And because most people never compare their records against their actual work history, those mistakes can remain hidden for years. That's why the next few minutes may be the most valuable part of this entire discussion. Because we're moving away from theory and into action. I'm going to show you exactly what to look for, where to find it, and what steps you can take if something doesn't seem right. This is where many retirees make an important discovery. And in some cases, that discovery leads to higher monthly benefits or even additional payments that should have been received years earlier. So grab a pen if you need one, open a notebook, or simply pay close attention, because what comes next is the practical process that can help you determine whether your own Social Security record deserves a closer look. The first step takes less than 10 minutes, and it starts with something every retiree should have access to, but surprisingly, many still don't. My Social Security account. If you've never created one before, don't worry. The process is straightforward, and once you're inside, you'll be able to view one of the most important records connected to your retirement benefits, your earnings history, year by year, decade by decade, every reported dollar that Social Security used to help calculate your benefits, and that single record may reveal more than you expect. Once you're inside your My Social Security account, the first thing you want to locate is your earnings history. This isn't a summary. It isn't an estimate. It's the actual year-by-year record that Social Security has on file for you. And this is where many people make a critical mistake. They glance at the page for a few seconds, see a long list of numbers, and assume everything must be correct. Don't do that. Take your time. Go through each year carefully. Look at the timeline of your working life and compare it to what you remember. You're searching for anything that doesn't make sense. A year showing zero income when you know you were employed. A year showing only a fraction of what you actually earned. A period where the numbers suddenly drop for no obvious reason. Or a gap that simply shouldn't be there. Remember, Social Security doesn't know what happened in your career unless the records show it. The system only works with the information it has, and if that information is incomplete, your benefit calculation may be incomplete as well. Now, some people discover everything looks perfectly accurate. That's great. At least you'll know your record has been verified. But others find something unexpected, and when they do, that's where the next step becomes important. You need documentation. Not assumptions, not memories, not estimates. Documentation. The stronger your documentation, the stronger your case for a correction. Start with whatever records you still have available. Old tax returns, W-2 forms, payroll records, pay stubs, employer earnings statements, even documents stored away in boxes, filing cabinets, or old folders can become extremely valuable if they verify income that isn't showing correctly. A lot of retirees worry that they need to produce every record from every year they ever worked. That's usually not necessary. Focus on the years that appear questionable. Those are the years that matter most. And don't underestimate the value of partial records. Even a small amount of supporting documentation can sometimes help establish that something is wrong and deserves further review. Here's what many people don't realize. The goal isn't to prove your entire career history all over again. The goal is to identify specific years where the reported information appears inaccurate and provide evidence supporting a correction. Once you've gathered what you have, the next step is contacting Social Security and requesting a review of the earnings record. This is the step where many people stop. They discover a possible problem, they make a note of it, and then they never follow through. Months pass, sometimes years pass, nothing changes. Because discovering a mistake and correcting a mistake are two very different things. A review only begins when action is taken. Depending on the situation, Social Security may ask for supporting documentation, additional information, or clarification regarding specific years under review. The important thing is simply getting the process started, because once a review begins, the agency has the ability to compare your evidence against the information currently stored in its records. If corrections are approved, those earnings can be credited appropriately, and if those corrected earnings increase your benefit calculation, the impact can be meaningful, not only going forward, but potentially looking backward as well. Many retirees focus entirely on future monthly checks. That's understandable. But in certain situations, adjustments can result in payments for benefits that should have been paid at a higher amount previously. And that's where people are often surprised, because they're not just looking at a larger monthly payment, they're looking at money that may have been overlooked for years.
Now let me pause here and mention something important. Don't expect instant results. This isn't something that happens overnight. Government reviews take time. Records must be examined. Documentation must be verified. Calculations may need to be revisited. Patience is part of the process. Some cases move quickly, others take longer. The timeline often depends on the complexity of the correction and the age of the records involved. But even if it takes time, that shouldn't discourage you, because a delayed correction is still better than never discovering the problem at all. And that brings us to another issue that deserves attention, one that becomes increasingly important the older an earnings record error is, because the longer a mistake goes unnoticed, the more difficult it can become to fix. Not impossible, but more difficult. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. Now let's talk about timing, because this is one area where many retirees unintentionally put themselves at a disadvantage. The reality is that correcting an earnings record becomes more challenging as time passes. That doesn't mean older errors can't be fixed. Many can. But older cases often require stronger documentation and more detailed verification. Think about it this way. A mistake discovered a few years after it occurs is usually easier to investigate than one discovered several decades later. Records may be easier to locate. Employers may still exist. Documents may be more accessible. The longer an issue remains hidden, the more complicated the process can become. That's why one of the worst things you can do is assume you'll look into it someday. Someday has a habit of turning into years, and years can make valuable evidence harder to find. This isn't meant to alarm you. It's meant to motivate you. If you suspect something may be wrong, it's worth checking sooner rather than later. A few hours spent reviewing your records today could potentially save months of frustration in the future. Now there's another area that deserves attention because it affects a different group of retirees, and surprisingly few people verify it. I'm talking about delayed retirement credits. If you waited beyond your full retirement age before claiming benefits, Social Security generally rewards that delay with increased monthly payments. For many retirees, each year of delay can significantly boost future benefits. Some people deliberately postpone claiming because they understand this strategy. They want the larger monthly check. They make sacrifices to wait. They build their retirement plan around those higher future payments. But here's the question almost nobody asks. Were those delayed retirement credits actually applied correctly? Most people assume they were, and in many cases they are. But assumptions are not the same thing as verification. If someone delayed benefits for several years expecting a larger monthly payment, it's worth making sure the final calculation reflects those additional credits properly. After all, if you waited specifically to earn those higher benefits, you deserve to receive every dollar the rules allow. That's why reviewing your benefit details isn't just about missing earnings. It's also about confirming that every factor affecting your benefit was applied correctly. Now let me tell you about another category of retirees who have faced challenges involving benefit calculations: surviving spouses. Over the years, various reviews and oversight reports have identified situations where widows and widowers received incorrect benefit amounts due to calculation issues and processing errors. What's important to understand is that these individuals didn't do anything wrong. They filed paperwork correctly. They followed the rules. They trusted the system. Yet errors still occurred. And that's what makes these situations so important, because they remind us that mistakes can happen even when people do everything they're supposed to do. In large systems, complexity creates opportunities for error. Not intentional wrongdoing, not conspiracy, just human mistakes, outdated records, complicated formulas, and processing issues that occasionally slip through. Unfortunately, when those mistakes involve retirement benefits, the financial consequences can be very real. A few dollars per month becomes hundreds per year. Hundreds become thousands over time. And that's why awareness matters. Most retirees spend years planning for retirement. They save, they budget, they make difficult decisions. Yet many never spend even 30 minutes reviewing the records that determine a major source of their retirement income. Think about that. People will compare prices before buying a television. They'll research vacation packages. They'll spend hours looking for discounts. Yet the benefit that may provide income for the rest of their lives often goes completely unquestioned. That's exactly why videos like this exist. Not because every record contains an error, not because every retiree is owed additional money, but because nobody should rely on assumptions when the stakes are this high. Now, as we approach the end of this discussion, I want to leave you with one final thought. The Social Security Administration is a massive organization responsible for managing information from millions of Americans across many decades. Most employees are simply trying to do their jobs and help people navigate an incredibly complicated system. But even the best systems make mistakes. The question isn't whether mistakes are possible. The question is whether you're willing to verify that those mistakes haven't affected you. Because ultimately, nobody has a greater incentive to protect your retirement income than you do. Nobody will review your records with the same level of attention. Nobody will care about your monthly benefit as much as you do. And that's why taking a few minutes to review your earnings history could be one of the most valuable financial decisions you make this year. If you were born before 1955, or if you know someone who is currently receiving Social Security benefits, take the time to log into your account and carefully review your earnings record from beginning to end. Look at every year, every entry, every number. If something appears wrong, don't ignore it. Ask questions, gather information, follow up. Because one missing year, one reporting error, or one overlooked calculation could affect your benefit for the rest of your retirement. And if this information helped you today, share it with someone you care about. A friend, a spouse, a sibling, a neighbor, anyone receiving Social Security benefits. Because sometimes a simple conversation is all it takes to help someone discover money they didn't even realize might be missing. And when it comes to retirement income, knowledge isn't just power. Sometimes it's dollars that belong in your pocket.